My name is Dylan. I'm from the small town of Springdale, Indiana. I'd like to first state that I am not the God Killer. Next, let me give you some context. This town always had a low population. It was a town where most people could say they knew almost everyone by name and had most of their lives. I'm the rare exception to this, having been an extreme introvert since I was a small child. I worked at a local diner, so I knew my coworkers along with most of the faces of the people in the town because they ate there so often. But I couldn't really remember any of them by name. I was 20 years old and lived on my own in my tiny, rundown house near the center of town when this all started. My parents both died of heroin overdoses when I was a teenager, and I never had any other siblings. I never knew any other relatives of mine, and I didn't go to college after high school. I didn't have many friends either, so generally no one really knew who I was. That is, up until recently. Rumors started floating around recently of a figure known as the God Killer. I actually had no idea this was a big thing until I looked around on some local Facebook groups to see what people were talking about. Usually there was some random, boring gossip among the local soccer mom types. But suddenly, the topic had shifted to something else entirely. It first popped up on my radar when I saw a woman post on the Springdale Happenings group, reading, "Has anyone heard about what happened to Mr. Stanford and his wife? Rumors are spreading that those teens who abducted those cats are missing too. My two kids are saying some fourth graders at their school found their bodies in the park the same way the Stanfords were left." My old elementary school math teacher replied, saying, "Rich bastards deserved it. But I didn't think their bodies got found. Not sure what happened to those two teens. I heard my grandson calling him the God Killer." I had no idea anything happened to the Stanfords, but I definitely knew who they were. Mr. Stanford and his wife moved to Springdale to buy up extra land for cheap, before also buying several local businesses and running them into the ground. They had a very large, extravagant house that seemed ridiculous to most of the locals. They became very unpopular for causing many in the area to lose their homes and jobs, as well as openly insulting anyone who disagreed with Mr. Stanford. The more I read, the better a picture I obtained of the situation. If the rumors were to be believed, Mr. and Mrs. Stanford were forcibly removed from their homes before being dragged to the local park where they were both shot in the head with a shotgun. Their bodies were then left exposed to rot out in the open until someone came along and reported this to the police. The police were unwilling to speak about the event or give any details to the press, supposedly to suppress widespread attention and local hysteria. The killer then struck again with two teenagers who became widely disliked in the community after making social media posts about horrifically abusing cats. They were killed the same way as the Stanfords, and their remains were also dumped in public. At some point, locals started calling the killer, or killers, the God Killer because of their tendency to murder people widely known and disliked by the community. The name both referenced the household name level of publicity these people received, and also the attempts of the victims to play God. Some time passed on with no new information besides speculation when I noticed someone I used to go to school with post something on his profile. My former classmate pointed out that everyone in the town suddenly seemed focused on not pissing everybody off. It was as if, suddenly, no one was to be trusted and anybody could have been the killer, waiting for someone unpopular to come up so they could strike again. Immediately after this, I noticed this at my work. Suddenly, I had no customers at the diner complaining about their food being too hot or cold. Everyone was surprisingly pleasant out of nowhere, and I can't say I hated it much. Then the news broke. That old math teacher that left the comment about the God Killer turned out to have molested his children about 2.5 decades ago, yet they stayed silent due to death threats made by the man as he got older. He surprisingly admitted to guilt without much of a fight, reportedly claiming to police that he was afraid to be out of prison with the accusations against him. He cited fear of the God Killer. The report actually made national news as a result of the creepy image the former teacher displayed in the news reports. He appeared constantly frantic and refused to talk to the press when asked about his reference to the God Killer. Since the local police had suppressed information about the God Killer, he was written off as completely insane by national news. It may not have been a front-page headline across the United States, but it was enough to shake the community. Things only got worse when he seemingly escaped from police custody. Rumors instantly spread of his body being discovered behind the local Kmart in the middle of the night, with his head blown off by a shotgun. Some also claimed that this rumor was false and that he himself was the God Killer. I became increasingly invested in the stories and gossip despite only ever leaving my house for work and to buy food. It all felt far away from me due to my reclusiveness. This remained the same until one night when I received a knock at my door. I got out of bed and looked at the clock. It was 11:30 at night. I walked to my door and opened it to see two police officers standing in front of me. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on my bed with my hands over my head. All I remembered was a sick feeling in my stomach and something about my car being linked to the crime scene. My head began to ache constantly over the next week as the police occasionally contacted me. It seemed as though they didn't have sufficient evidence to take me in, and they hinted they were trying to keep the case quiet. However, this didn't go according to plan. People began to avoid me at work, never saying anything directly, but throwing me quick glances when they thought I wasn't looking and whispering about me behind my back. I grew increasingly paranoid as I realized rumors were spreading about me both on and off Facebook. One night, as I was working at the diner, I went to ask one woman what she wanted to drink, and she was visibly uncomfortable as a result of that alone. Every time I would come back to the table, she would just look at me nervously and mumble a response. Whether I was asking her if she wanted a refill for her drink or checking if her food was okay, it didn't matter. She appeared terrified of me. At one point, when she finished, I extended my arm to grab her plate before she smacked my hand away and screamed, "Don't touch me!" before running out of the store. Everyone around us stared at me with concern and horror, not letting their eyes move away despite me ignoring them. I began to shake as I continued working, one of my coworkers asking me if I was okay. I didn't answer her as my brain began to feel like it was scratching its way out of my skull. I looked around the diner as I went to greet the people just entering when I noticed everyone was still staring. I spun in a circle, slowly taking in every single one of their faces. "What?" I screamed. "What the hell do you people want?" I stormed out of work without clocking out before getting into my car and driving home. My phone began to buzz with email notifications by the time I got home. No one knew my phone number, but somehow my email began spreading throughout the town. I was already beginning to receive death threats. I ran into my room and threw myself onto my bed before letting out a large groan. That's when I heard the footsteps down the hall. I slowly lifted myself up off my bed and took one step towards the door. That's when the footsteps stopped. I ran to the door and shut and locked it. Someone broke into my fucking house to take me in because they believe I'm the God Killer, I thought to myself. How the hell could this happen? I took out my phone and began to call the police. I told them my situation, and they simply hung up. There was silence for a few moments before I finally heard a voice. "I know you're not the God Killer, Dylan," a terrifyingly calm voice stated behind my door. "I know, because I am."